telling you amazing stories. I mean, obviously you got to wade through all the phallocratic, macho nonsense, but if you can manage to sit through that stuff, you're going to see something fascinating in those stories. I love them. Notice MI5's logo. Look at the pyramid and the eye at the top. See that? Well, John Dee was a great occultist, sacred geometrist, and court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth, and black magician. And he worked for this woman, who is called Elizabeth Tudor, the daughter of Henry VIII. The original, she who must be obeyed. But her name in history is interesting, I would say. Right? She was known as the Virgin Queen, and it's not because she couldn't get a man. This is about something else. They've, told us lies in history, but Virgin Queen, remember how the offspring of one of the sides would procreate? Think about it. And John Dee was a Rosicrucian, which is a secret society of Freemasons operating in the world. And that is why in all government buildings, as Jordan Maxwell and people have pointed out, you have the Rose Garden and the symbol of the rose. In every capital city of the world, you have the Rose Garden, and the Bohemian Society and all these groups use the symbol of the rose, the Tudor rose. So John Dee was the man around the time when they actually discovered that there's a barrier up there, because by that time they had telescopes and they maybe had some primitive flying ships. I mean, we've heard about the flying ships for thousands of years, right, and the stuff I've told you about already. But they may have made some primitive crafts and tried to leave the planet and couldn't do it. So it was around about that time, the 13th, 14th, 15th century, that these technocrats realized, hey, we got a serious problem here. We've just spent almost 11,000 years trying to build up the hardware to get out of this planet, and now, no matter what we build, we can't get out because there's a blinking Stargate up there. So they were in turmoil, and that is one of the reasons why those periods of history are so important, not for the reasons they've been telling you in history school. They really were in a dilemma. They were imprisoned in this planet. Remember in the book of Revelation it says, and God will chain the beast to the pit for 1,000 years? Right? Satan being chained to a pit. They realized they couldn't get out. So John Dee, to cut a long story short, said, well, we need another approach. We'll not stop with the development of the hardware. Keep that going. But we're going to need an altogether different approach. And he contacted his patrons, the Queen of England and her coterie, these original Illuminati types. And he said, what we need to do is go to a completely higher form of intelligence. Not extraterrestrial, but pan-dimensional. They may be able to help us with this. This is not the first time that such a portal has been opened on our Earth, and it wasn't the last. John Dee contacted some beings that C.S. Lewis refers to as the macrobes. He says that under our level of perception, we have the microbes. A couple of hundred years ago, if you had talked to anybody about microbes, microbial life, bacteria, they'd have laughed at you. They'd have thought you were insane and probably locked you up if you described that. Then we invented the telescope, and now it's common knowledge, right? A whole universe of life forms, right? Beneath our perception of vision. Well, C.S. Lewis says there is another level above us, on the next level up almost, which is the same. You can't have a physical instrument so much to deal with it. The instrument of noticing that and knowing that is the human intuition. Or shall we say the human imagination. But John Dee, being an occultist and a magician of very great power, opened a portal in England in the 14th century. The 15th century was opened in England. And he contacted beings of a higher grade of intelligence. This thing is a whole study in itself to do with occultism and what have you. And he contacted these macrobes. And these macrobes actually don't like being pestered by inferior types like him. And we can't say they're good or they're bad, that those terms ain't going to work with this. But the long story short, as his mind is nearly frazzling with their interaction, they actually did tell him, oh yeah, what's your problem? And they said, oh yeah, we have no problem with that. We can help you with that. We can, fix that. And he goes, well then, let's do it. But the only trouble was that in order to do it, the information that they had to pour through his consciousness, he very quickly realized would take literally thousands of years to manifest in physical time. When the information started transmitting through his work, and his work was called Enochian magic, for those who happen to be into that, when you see all those lovely pictures and quaint images of magicians in circles and all these symbols around and the five-pointed pentagram and all that stuff, have you ever noticed how many of those symbols are actually planetary symbols for the start? I mean, we're talking occultism, yet they're mostly symbols of the planets. Because that also is some subject that's been put before us totally erroneously. I go into that in the book. but what that really is all about and why planetary symbols are used so often. So when he started translating into his Enochian, those quaint things you see in museums, all that information that was pouring down, it was too big for his consciousness and Edward Kelly and some other people that he worked with. So he had to get all his counterparts in Europe to get on the ball with this. So all these Illuminati families and black nobility, intelligence people, you know, they were all working simultaneously at the same time. But then obviously history would notice this, wouldn't it? That all of these families start getting into what looks like the occult. So they sold that back to us as a period in history when suddenly there was a renaissance of esoteric knowledge in the world and everybody was into it. As if it's sort of something like a vogue thing, you know? And I'm not saying things like that don't happen. But all over the planet, all these rich families and rich people start getting into the occult. They've got to put it before us in this quaint way, just like they put swashbuckling movies of Errol Flynn in front of you, you know, to tell you something. The real story behind that is that these scholars were all working independently on this vast amount of knowledge that was just pouring in day and night through the consciousness of the psychics of the world who worked for these royal families. Cornelius Agrippa and all of these other people were doing it, writing it down. And then later on it was discovered that it's so much information, what they're telling us, and it's also very hard to practicalize, and also they don't even know what it is, because it was a very advanced science, way, way beyond what this guy could translate. So they had to hand all of these dossiers out. And then later it was realized that having each of these intellectual geniuses working in their own little garrets up in the Bavarian hills is not good enough. We're going to have to, this knowledge is getting so much now, you have to bring it together into places where the scholars can come. We call those places universities, universe cities, cities of the universe, or colleges, where you collage information. You see, it wasn't good enough to have everybody doing their own research. The knowledge was getting so immense, they brought it into central places. It's not for you, me, and Grandma to go and get educated and get a degree. They don't care about us. They never did. Now you can do it. They've offered us the privilege, thank God. But my father and your forefathers didn't even know that. Just 50 years ago, didn't even have the privilege of education. So, you know, think about that. We have the privilege. We get a little bit, you know, arrogant about it. Yeah. Very, very short time ago in your own families, that was not what was happening. Your fathers were sweating on the fields, wondering what life is all about and why they are going through the lives that they have been going through. We owe it to them. If you're not a humanitarian, that's perfectly all right. If you don't care about humanity, that doesn't bother me. But you have your own family line then, your own tradition, your own private lineage of your forefathers, your mothers and your fathers, your grandfathers who slaved on this planet under these people. You owe it to them to find out the answers and do something. You should be doing it for humanity. But even if that one doesn't, you know, trigger you, and I'm assuming it does, everyone who's in this particular venue. But even if it wouldn't, I tell people all the time, if it doesn't hit you on that level, I could get plenty of other reasons why you should do this and fight this fight. The thing is that this knowledge was pouring in thick and fast, so they eventually created the universities. And if you don't believe this, just study the architecture of the universities of the world. Go there and look at the symbols they use in those places, and how they're divided and sequestered, and the robes and the clothes that the scholars wear and everything. And you'll find it's occult. Part of the information that was transmitted to these people from the macrobes was that in order to even begin to build what you need, you're going to have to basically use the entire planet's mineral resources to get the very physical wealth, you know, to pay the people, to do whatever. It's like running a business, right? Anybody here is a business owner, they know what I'm talking about. Well, this is a business that incorporated building super technologies. So is it not from the 14th and 15th century that we have the rise of the British Empire? This tiny little country that stretches its tentacles out to the rest of the world? Isn't it from that time that we have the universities of the world rising? Isn't it from that time we have the stock exchange rising? Isn't it that time we have the Industrial Revolution's beginnings? The agricultural revolution, right? Think of just how many things that we now take for granted that came out of that particular time. Wasn't that the time of the new science of Francis Bacon and Newton and Copernicus and Kepler? All looks very divided, doesn't it? Well, because it's divided, because we're learning it from the universities who have been put together by them in the first place, who know how to disseminate the knowledge so that you won't see the overall pattern. But the few at the top of the pyramid know what is really going on. These things don't just arise by themselves. Just study those periods themselves, please. If you go even on a trip to England, you know, on a holiday, and you go through those lovely estates, you know, those beautiful estates of the landed gentry, just ask, when is the architecture? Ask the guides, when do these get built? 90% of the stately homes in England were all built around the 16th century. Something happened in that time of England that we now inherit, which we have as modern times. Before that, the kings were shivering in their castles. You know, they didn't even have glass for the windows. And yet suddenly something happens. So the British Empire arose, and they sent out the pirates. They sent out their emissaries from the Hudson Bay Company and the East India Company to the four corners of the world to enslave the world, to get the mineral resources, to get the slavery, to get the gold, you see, to bring it back for one agenda orchestrated by just a very few people of the Tudor dynasty. America's destiny is very much involved in this. Through the Hudson Bay Company and the Russell Trust, this country was also taken over by the pirates. Pirates, the word pirates is from pyrate, fire. The fire ones, the Illuminati, the ones who have the fire. Right? We've been watching too much Errol Flynn, and they put before us all this romantic stuff. Find out who these characters were and what they were up to. Just study the pirates alone. Just study the main pirates and their biographies, those characters. It's a fascinating story will unfold that you won't be able to explain unless you have these answers. Some of these pirate leaders had tremendous magical powers. They were also extremely brutal and ruthless. Now, the macrobes, they don't do nothing for free. First of all, they told John Dee and his cohorts that to get the key to the Stargate, you need to do two things. The first thing you need to do has to be in two parts. The first thing you need to do is to find out how to make matter from energy. I'm cutting a long story short. It took them hundreds of years just to read through this stuff. But they said, you're too stupid to even know how to do that. So we have to teach you the opposite first, which is how to release energy from matter. That's not what you're going to do, but that's how you have to learn. And to do that, it's going to take you 500 years. Remember when Oppenheimer split the bomb, split the atom? That was when they patted themselves on the back, because phase one was accomplished. The pupils had learned now how to release energy from matter that day. Remember, even people said, my God, they could have destroyed this whole arm of the universe. Well, they don't care, because they have to prove to their masters now, right, that they've learned phase one. That's actually not what they have to learn. They have to learn the opposite. But they had to learn phase one of how to release energy from matter. That was done. Now they're doing the opposite. Now, slowly, they're beginning to learn how to create matter from energy, which is what the macrobes told them is one of the keys to get out of the Stargate. MIT, SRI, NEC Corporation, and also Sun Corporation are just fronts for that. That's all they are. They're just fronts for that particular agenda. The second key involved, the macrobes told them, involves the element known as silicon. And you're talking to John Dee in the 14th century. He's like, what anything is this? What? Right? So they're telling him this stuff, and they said the second key has to do with silicon. What we're calling the Silicon Revolution is the end game that is now being played out, which is why you see these symbols coming from the ancient world, on these logos. But the macrobes don't do anything for nothing. So John Dee goes, well, what do you want in return for your knowledge? And they said, we want blood. Because just like any entity, any vampire, right? Blood is energy. And if you study the occult, you'll realize that blood is a form of energy. And blood happens to be the second most commonest word in the Bible after God. So John Dee goes, oh, how much do you want and when do you want it? No worries. Oh yeah, tell when and where. So the macrobe said, well, we want sacrifices. Ladies and gentlemen, is it not also since that time of the 16th century that the wars, not battles between two maniac kings with a couple of hundred knights, but I'm talking about the wars, begin? Not only the ships and the trade routes and the debauchery, Africa, what these people have done to just that continent alone? Well, you don't have to go there. Think about what they've done in America. But isn't it also that time that the great wars begin? Have you ever questioned why it is that all the soldiers always wear occult symbols? Because in order to have a ritual death, even if you just study your common garden black magician who's going to kill a cat, right? They have to draw the right circle, do it under the right constellations, do it under the right timing, right? Think of a mass on a huge level that has to send up energy to these beings. It can't be done, it doesn't qualify as a ritual killing unless certain things are done properly. So the location is very important. And the timing is also very important. So they said the ritual centers, our cities are actually, that's what they are. They're ritual centers for that. Do you know that there's 23 zodiacs in Washington, D.C., sequestered into the architecture there? That's more than any single place on the planet. In this book that was recently done, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, this author goes into that, into the memoirs of the Library of Congress of all the founding fathers to describe. He doesn't know what he's looking at, but at least he presents the information of why these centers exist. Now, because of time, we do not have the time to have all of the quotes from his book that I have that are so beautiful. They're in my book for you, but we don't have time to just do them in this moment. Let me skip forward. How long we got? Yeah, see. So let's just try and get somewhere here. We're close to the end anyway. I'll skip through a lot of stuff here. Unfortunately, we don't have that time. So when you see our cities, these ritual cities, please realize that the geometry that's been proven now to be involved in them, through that book and previously through the work of George Maxwell and others, that these cities are designed specifically for reasons. And those monuments and obelisks that you see, they're all for reasons. To enhance grid energy, to be sacrificial sites. Lady Diana Spencer was killed not far from this Eiffel Tower, right? At the junction of 3 roads, at the 13th pillar, etc., etc., etc. 100 years, almost to the day when Jack the Ripper killed his first victim on the 31st of August. A virgin. Right? Lady Diana Spencer represents the virgin, right? In occult terms. The whores that Jack the Ripper killed represent in esoteric terms a willing victim or a sacrificial victim. The 31st of January is when the sign of the Virgin, the Virgo constellation, goes into the underworld. On that day. The Virgin constellation of Virgo descends into the underworld. They take out the Virgin then. I teach this extensively, all of these rituals and what they get up to. They're not going to use solar astrology, because then the average astrologer would get onto this. They use other kinds of astrology that are more esoteric. And I specialize in that and go into this whole ball game about how geometry and sacred geometry is used in the designs of cities, and how assassinations of John F. Kennedy and other groups, other people, are entirely based on this. It's something we're living in them, we might as well know about it. It's happening in our backyard. And how the American designs of cities are like a silicon chip. Now remember we talked about the ancient monuments? What they were built for? When these people when the serpent race went to different parts of the world, they had long lifespans, these sons of the serpent. But when they would actually die, their fellows, who remained, in order to commemorate the amazing life of this person, who's part alien, who'd come from another star system, who had enlightened the world, who brought civilization, healing, they could mend bones, they enlightened the Adamic race, who gave them freedom, who literally were our gods. When one of these people would die, they would erect, not over them, not as tombs, but they would build in sacred geometry with using harmonics, a edifice as a cenotaph, not a tomb, a cenotaph, there's a difference, right? To commemorate the fall of that being. And that's what those tombs are, and what happens when you're there. Right? When you go to those places and feel something, you're connecting with something. Remember all those ritual murders and deaths that happened in the Aztecs and the Druids, how suddenly all these wonderful cultures went to wreck and ruin and went into sacrifice and death and bloodshed? That was to change this when the other side came back in power again. But just know for now that these serpent people had a habit of doing that. And they would try to make the harmonics and the sacred geometry embody some aspect of that particular hero that died. Some particular beloved, means that this person communicated. They try to do it in stone to make that person live. Today that's what we do when we raise a gravestone to a dead loved one. We don't realize we're doing that now. But that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to encompass something of that person's life. Now the dark aliens do it too. When one of their beings died, they would bury this person and they would build something over it. And in fact, when one of them characters would die, wherever their bones were buried, that has become historically a place of unbelievable unrest in the world. And when I looked into this occult paradigm, I found out that 2 places where 2 of these dark masters are buried, one is Palestine and the other is Northern Ireland. So I've been working on, at some point getting some sort of exorcism done where we can remove these remains. It's not going to be easy because they're protected and the Dark Ones know where they are and worship those places as an altar. But yeah, the aura of the negativity that comes from these people's bodies, it causes conflict, which they suck off and suck off and suck off. Now, interesting too, because the White Brotherhood, where they're buried, is always feelings of great peace and protection, you know? So when you remember, you're talking about earth changes, some people are fanatical about earth changes and where to go, you know, if there's going to be earth changes. I personally don't buy into that, and I'm not of that disposition, but I have respect for those who do. Well, one of the things is these monuments, their very positioning is of interest because they have protection around them. One moment. Come to the final part here. So Washington, D.C. is one of the cities that is entirely based on this kind of geometry. And we need to realize it. And in Washington, D.C., you have very patently occult symbols. Here's George Washington in a strange pose, which actually represents the god of the Templars, Baphomet. There's nothing evil about this symbol in itself, I'm not saying that, but just the fact that it is occult, and one of your presidents happens to be stylized exactly as that, should tell us something. Then, of course, what we're more familiar with is that the symbols of the Nazis, for instance, are Druidic symbols. Right? Jordan Maxwell has gone into this about the symbols of the Malta cross and the oak leaves. Isn't it interesting that the Oval Office has an oak leaf motif? Hasn't the cavalry wore the oak acorns on their hats, your American cavalry? How the Russian on their lapels, the Russian generals wear the oak leaves, the French around their hats, so the gendarmes wear the oak leaves. I mean, wait a minute, half these people were meant to be enemies at different times. How come they're wearing all the same symbols? Yeah, they look enemies on paper. That's about it. The skull and bones, used by the pirates, used by the Yale University people, right? The swastika. We don't have time to go into all this now, obviously, but... and here is the symbol of your Smithsonian Institute, a black sun. And they've also been telling us, by the way, about the two ways that they control the world. The cross and the crown, which is the symbol of the Knights Templar, are the two means by which they've controlled the world. Religion and monarchy. Right? Two forms of mind control that have done the job. Again, I apologize. We have a lot to go into and we don't have the time. Yeah, I'd love it. Oh, here's an interesting one here. Here's the serpent itself, right? And look beside it is the swastika. Remember I made an anecdote earlier on about how the swastika was a serpent? This comes from the Picts of ancient Scotland, using the swastika, the Malta cross, and the serpents. You know why? Anunnaki, as I said, was a bad translation. The word Nazi, one of the 8 children of the mother goddess Ninharsag, right, who's Sumerian goddess of the Anunnaki, Nazi was her son, one of the 8 children. 8 children. See that? The children, one of the children of an Anunnaki member was called Nazi. Or Nazi. Nazareth was the hometown of Jesus Christ, son of a virgin. Nazareth. Because Naza meant Nagar. It comes from Nagar, or the serpent. Priests. Now, we have been told all along what's going on. When they're talking about nuclear war, atomic war, Cold War, and Star Wars, those very terms tell you that they're not dropping bombs on you from space. They're working inside. Nuclear and atomic imply something. Cold implies something. We're looking for reds under the beds and, atom bombs to drop from the sky, and all the time they're working on us inwardly, atomically, genetically. The whole thing's been a genetic war. Because remember, part of the journey to build the hardware is not just to get out of the planet. What also did they lose? Was the ability to do gene research. Does that ring any bells? What's been coming of vogue very recently? The very same thing. In the Bay Area, California, right here, most of the companies are not silicon-based. They are genetic and orientated. Many of you work there, you know this. 3/4 of them are gene-orientated. And then you have satellites, and then you have silicon. So they're doing it, and they've been telling us all along in the terminology. The rituals of blood. I have really specialized in this a lot. It's a fascinating subject in itself. But please realize that the Holocaust, do you know the word Holocaust in Yiddish actually means burned sacrifice? Right? John F. Kennedy, Guyana, Waco, Heaven's Gate, Columbine, Lady Diana Spencer. These are all specific rituals of blood. Yeah, same thing. Now this maniac, who's under mind control, Yeah. He is operating from the Saturnian cult point of view. Remember how all the victims had Nike clothes on and Nike shoes? Nike, they're leaving you symbols. They play with us all the time. That was a ritual death done at a specific time. I mean, we know about the comet, but everyone was wondering, what about the comet? Nobody made the connection. It's like the comet represents a timing of something. Because timing in ritual death is very important. Everybody's wondering about the comet. Nobody was wondering about the timing. Here is the Nike tick, which actually represents the ring of Saturn. See that? That's the planet Saturn and its ring. All the victims wearing black attire. Black is the symbol of Saturn. Ask any astrologer, what is the symbol of the color of Capricorn and Saturn? It's black. The Nike logo is Saturn. All the victims were castrated. Read your mythology. What does Saturn do? He is the castrator of his father, right, the god. And the name Heaven's Gate. In astrology, there are two gates of the zodiac, Cancer and Capricorn. Capricorn was called the gate of passing. Cancer is the gate of the coming in of the soul. Gate of Capricorn is the passing out. Look at that. A ritual sacrifice called Heaven's Gate. The souls are literally left to go through the Heaven's Gate, out of the zodiac, out of time, out of the world. Yes. Very interesting. And that's only a small part of the symbolism that they surround in this part of these kinds of things. Here is an interesting symbol of a summit meeting. I think it's the G7. You see the table? What's in the middle of it? There's Clinton and Blair and Mitterrand, right? And there you have the circle. Did you know that this was the original symbol that was going to be put on the dollar bill? Amaraka already means the land of the serpents. But this was the symbol that was going to be put on your dollar bill. Look at the surrounding. It wasn't put on. It was a little obvious. Now, it happens to be a fact that all of the presidents that were ever elected, it's in my book there, have direct blood ties to the kings of England, to specific monarchs. Everybody familiar with that? If you're not, you better find out. That every president who's been elected, and the ones who have not been elected, who lost, have no blood ties, or lesser blood ties. Every president of America, see, this is meant to be a constitutional country? That's a laugh. But anyway, that's the point, is that they all have direct blood ties to British monarchs and to black nobility families. And the Sumerians state that the first human kings on earth were the offspring of custodial rulers who mated with the human women. Those matings entitled the half-human offspring to become the early monarchs of the earth. Get this book, Gods of Eden. I think Ted might be carrying it. The Sumerians state that the first human kings were the offspring of the monarchs of the earth, of the custodial rulers. He's telling you everything in that 5 lines, what we've just been talking about today. The laying out of the red carpet. I thought that was just for royal families. Clinton walks on one. Bush walks on one. Reagan walked on the red carpet. Cutting the red tape, right? Getting through all the red. I'm in the red, you know, when you're in the red. What is this bit about the red? And then the walking on the red carpet signifies the bloodline. That's why they roll a carpet out for the Queen of England, to say that she is of the royal bloodline. But your presidents are walking on it. That's symbolism for something. They're telling you we're the bloodline. We're not independently elected. We work for the same establishment. We walk on the red carpet. Thomas More, 15th century, the time we're talking about, everywhere. He was the man who was executed. He wrote the book Utopia. You know the book Utopia? You studied in school. He wrote this, and listen what he said. Everywhere do I perceive a certain conspiracy of rich men seeking their own advantage under the name and pretext of the Commonwealth. It's so old, it's new. Well, let's try. I'd love to get through this. To give you an idea of the kind of characters that have been ruling us. The 14th century Plantagenet Richard II, one of the most unpredictable of the English kings, after an unsuccessful peasants' revolt, this is familiar to anyone who studied British history, declared to his Saxon underlings, God omnipotent is mustering in his clouds on our behalf armies of pestilence, that they shall strike your children yet unborn. Look at that line. They will strike your children yet unborn and unbegot, that lift your vassal hands against my head and threat the glory of my precious crown. You wretches, detestable on land or sea, you will seek equality with lords and are unworthy to live. Give this message to your colleagues. Rustics you were, and rustics you are still. You will remain in bondage, not as before, but incomparably harsher. For as long as we live, we will strive to suppress you, and your misery will be an example for posterity. However, we will spare your lives if you remain faithful. So choose now which course you want to follow. These are just a small example of the people that have been ruling this world. And their cohorts, like this character, philosopher Malthus, who advocated the eradication of the lower elements of society. He proposed wars, epidemics, and famines, to thin out the herd. He especially wanted to control the sexual reproduction of the underclasses. Darwin embraced these ideas. Herbert Spencer. While Darwin got the credit, the leading proponent of this chilling racial evolutionary theory was Herbert Spencer, whose ideas were based on race. Only one race is capable of ascending to the highest level of the evolutionary spiral, the others will be left behind. We all think he's talking about some Aryans or something like that. Because remember, to cover the racial, remember we're talking about the serpent race? To cover that up, that you want to actually find out what they're really talking about, they've done this number with the whole Aryan Anglo-Saxon, they're the superior race bit, which holds no water and is not true. Sure, they're wonderful people, very cultured and all of that, but so are a lot of others. That's another whole smoke screen to make sure you never find out what race they really mean, or they're really talking about. The checkerboard, and how the administrators of the Masons will use the checkerboard, like your police. And here's a symbol from Abbey Road, the Beatles, walking on the checkerboard. Don't have time to go into why that was. And some people have asked me, how come it is, that we're so behind in this game? How come, we are, like, not knowing any of this? And I use this anecdote of a game of chess. If I bring up Chess Master up here and ask him, what are the principles by which I can become a master of the game of chess, he'll say these 4 things. He'll say that you need a sense of patience. Now, if you don't have patience, don't even try to begin the game to learn it. He'll say you need a sense of timing. If you don't have a sense of timing, don't open the book. You have to have knowledge of your opponent, right? And then the 4th one that they'll tell you is that you need to have the willingness to make any and all sacrifices. Now, ladies and gentlemen, why are the dark side winning the game? It's because they got infinite patience. They've been working on one thing for 50,000 years. I call that patience. They got a brilliant sense of timing because they know all about the astrology and the divination that we've forgot, that our agricultural ancestors all knew about. Well, we're with the Julian calendar and we're not interested in any of that stuff anymore. We're slaves of the watch, but we don't know about the higher time to rule our own lives by it. They have amazing knowledge of you. Right? They have intense knowledge of us, their enemies. And the 4th one is the clincher, isn't it? Because they're willing to make any and all sacrifices when and wherever they need to do it. It's as simple as that. And they are the game players. They even use that symbol in their own lodges. Now, I'm not saying that the average Freemason is involved in this. Of course not. We're talking about an extremely elite group that has permeated and infiltrated these groups in the 17th century. Now, Freemasonry uses the symbol of the G in the center. See that? Well, G is often and usually in ancient times depicted like this. What does that look like? Yeah. So people have gone into what does the G in Freemasonry mean? One of its more esoteric meanings is to do with this. And these are the symbols of technology. People who have not understood this, the rule and the compass, they do represent everything that a normal Freemason will tell you. I'm not saying that. But they are the symbols of technology, which is what the agenda was, and inside it is the serpent symbol. Don't believe me? Look how they're using it again in just a simple logo. What is this for? Look what the title is at the bottom. Everybody see that? Yeah. Simply telling us things that we just pass by and not think of. Recognize that? The serpent. Through money. Remember we said we came together to get the resources of the world so they could get on with their agenda? And that wave symbol, that wave, or that serpent-like symbol, is found in many, many things. You've seen this logo many times. What does this look like? What does this word say? Say it out loud, somebody. If you add the phoneme S-E-R on the beginning of that, what do you get? Because Pentium doesn't mean anything in English, does it? It's Latin for the 5 room. Yeah, the room of the 5, or the level of the 5th. Pentagrams are very important. It's because it has to do with the pentagon. The pentagon is the 5th shaped room. So Pentium and Microsoft are funded by the Pentagon, who are funded by whatever behind that. But the word Pentium has a, you put on the SER on the front of that, and that will tell you what's going on. Gateway. Remember we talked about the gateway? Intel inside. Have you ever noticed how many of their corporate logos is a door, a little bit ajar? How many times you notice the portal? Even the Pentium 2 logo looked like a doorway. They always use a symbol of a doorway to get out of something. Check into the logos. They're very interesting. There's one point here that the British royal family used the Malta cross and the dove. And everyone goes, oh, the dove. You know, symbol of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. No, it isn't. The word in Latin or Spanish for dove is columb, right? From which we get Columbia. So America was called Columbia, founded by Christopher Columbus, District of Columbia, Columbia Records, Columbia Pictures, Columbia. Isn't it interesting that all your drugs come from Columbia, South America? Yeah, you know, if you find out who's running Columbia and who named it, you'll know why they're sending the drugs from there. British Columbia and Columbus. Well, there was a magician who was working for this black nobility called Giuseppe Balsamo, known more poetically as Count Cagliostro. He had, in Freemasonry, a rite that he called Cagliostro's Egyptian rite, which involved a virginal boy or girl as an oracle or even priest for channeling information. These virgins were known in Masonic circles as the Columns. Remember, like 1999, the massacre at Columbine High School? Involving what? Children, virgins. There's a reason that this is a rite, a sacrificial rite. When soldiers are going to go and die, it's no good just to have them dress up and kill each other. They've got to be wearing stars, 5-pointed stars, oak leaves, Malta crosses. As a sign to the macrobes, these are your marked ones. Then they'll send them to a field or a certain place. You know those fields in France where people died? In Crimea? Check out where they are on the meridians. Find out, go into Richard Hoagland's website. Find out all of this stuff about the exact positioning of certain things. Duke of Brunswick, who was the head of the Freemasonic order in 17th century, stood up to the whole world Freemasonry and said these words: I have been convinced that we as an order have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise, though not infallible, their methods being black magic, that is to say, now look at this, electromagnetic power, hypnotism and powerful suggestion. We are convinced that this order is being controlled by some sun order after the nature of the Illuminati, if not by that order itself. There's Freemasons who don't even know about this. Quote, when he asked for the disbanding of the entire order of Freemasonry in the 17th century because he knew that the evil archy had got inside. George Washington called pretty much for the same thing over here. Or warned. Jefferson warned. Another black magician, Bertrand Russell. You should check into who the Russell family were. Hitherto, in this regard, wars, he says, have been disappointing. We need to bring into being another black plague. H.G. Wells, investigations into the beginning of religion have accumulated steadily throughout the past half-century, but it is only by great efforts of censorship, by sectarian education of an elaborately protected sort, that ignorance about them is maintained. Okay, so when people say, oh, this couldn't all be happening, you know, by any kind of conspiracy, he's saying it is. And it takes a lot of elaboration to actually disguise the knowledge. And another one of your Americans, a brilliant man, Anthony Sutton, of Stanford University. Right. He said in his book, Trilaterals Over America, their interests are global. And much as they may protest, we see no difference between trilateral globalism and, for example, the British and French imperialism of the 19th century, or for that matter, the Holy Roman Empire. Well, he's absolutely right, because they're not different. They don't. That's why they use the laurel leaves from ancient Rome. That's why they say the eagle has landed on the moon, because the eagle is the symbol of Vatican. Vatican is not the same thing as as Catholicism. There's two different things. It's a fact that the Vatican own all your state buildings. The White House rent goes to the Vatican. All the solar telescopes in the world, and including the observatories of outer space, belong to Vatican. Before any astronomer can pass information to the world, it goes by Vatican intelligence first. Especially solar observations. What would that be all about? In order to get out of the Stargate, they've been trying everything conceivable. Everything you can think of. But then, you know, they've been using this and that. And, you know, it's like a burglar. You have this etheric barrier. What does a burglar do when he comes to a wire fence? He puts in a dummy wire, doesn't he? He clips on a dummy wire and then he cuts the middle wire and leaves a gate to get through, the Stargate, right? That's what they want to do, but you can't do that with a pair of pliers up there. You have to do it with energy. So they've been trying to do it with laser energy, which they mount on the satellites. The first satellites went up so they could do that. So they could beam energies, of a laser power onto the Stargate to try and open a gate. But they don't know the calibration. That's what Stargate's all about, where they can't find the 13th blah, 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 right? They're telling you, they're giving you updates. They can't get through. So they then created recently, through the work of Nikola Tesla, a very, very powerful form of microwave technology. They've been trying it stronger and stronger all the time. It's called HARP. It was invented here by Tesla. They worked on it in Alaska. But the ultimate goal of HARP was to mount it on the satellites to try and beam its way through. They've been doing it for a lot longer, this power, this microwave technology. And the problem was that they were doing it for so long that they superheated the atmosphere and created what we know as the ozone layer. The ozone layer is not created by your CFCs. Unfortunately, it's not. It's created by this endless amount of beaming that they do of these microwaves up there that has depleted the ozone layer. That's why they don't care. They knew it was happening, but they're thinking they're getting out. So when you think you're getting out, you go mad, don't you? And then when they seen it happening, they had to give an excuse. So they went into the environmental world where there is a problem with CFCs. And they said, let's do that. Let's tell them it's the McDonald's cartons. Anything. They'll believe it. And they did. The combined military expenditures of all the world's governments in 1987 alone were so large that all the social programs of the United Nations could be financed for 300 years. Does everybody get this? So we're talking about poverty here and it can never change and what are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is stop these people from doing what they're doing first. The combined military expenditures in 1 year alone could find all the social programs that the United Nations has, all of them, for 300 years. So I just want to say thank you for this presentation. Our planet has been visited in the past time. When I describe these aliens coming into our planet, right, into this planet, what does that sound like? When something from an alien source invades, right, an organism, what would that sound like to you? A viral infection. So people ask me, what are we going to do about it? Wave placards, shoot bows and arrows at them? Not going to work. They have invaded us, and it is exactly like that. It is exactly the same paradigm. What does the holistic doctor tell you to do when you're invaded by a virus? What is the terms that they use? To strengthen the immune system. The earth is intelligent. The earth knows what to do. The earth is living. The earth doesn't want this pestilence on itself. We're running around trying to fight them, in the normal way. It's not going to work. The earth is intelligent and living, and it knows what to get off of itself when it gets off it, and do it in the right way. But we have to strengthen its immune system, and we've lost the methodology of doing it. Each and every human being is a white blood corpuscle, a lymphocyte on the face of the earth. But if you're not doing your own rituals, if we've lost our traditional roots, and don't know about ritual, although some people gladly are getting back into that and deeply researching this, those rituals are not just, because I want to go to God and I'm, bored with my life. Every ritual that you do, no matter what it is, you must have in your mind that that ritual also involves the earth plane on which you live. Every ritual you do has no meaning unless you think that way. The dragon dances and the ghost dances of the Native American Indians, what do you think that was all about? This is going to give you some line. You know what that was all about? All the shamans of the world. When they do their rituals, they're doing that. Their work, harmonically through dances, is to strengthen the immune system of the earth. They become that. They become emissaries of the earth, which is why they wear animal headdresses. But they've been all murdered. That's why the indigenous people have been slaughtered wherever they've gone, because the Dark Brotherhood, when the immune system of the earth starts to strengthen, they feel it bad, like a virus would, like a parasite. So that was why in the 17th century, exactly the same period I'm talking about, there was an all-out agenda that when you come across the indigenous people, you annihilate them. First of all, they're probably descendants of the sons of the serpent, who you hate anyway. And secondly, they're doing this kind of magical work. So get rid of them. So the Druids were destroyed, the Indians were destroyed, the Aboriginals were destroyed. Today it's happening as well. They can't have them around because they know. So few of them are left. So many of these rituals have been lost. You see, that we don't know what to do anymore. So each of us must research this to find out that even in your thoughts, your connection to the earth itself, and your own private rituals must be tied in some way, in a ritual way, to discover that. And I'll leave you with this, because they have been telling us. In the movie Highlander, from the dawn of time we came, moving silently down through the centuries. living many secret lives. No one has ever known that we were among you. Until now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, your patience, and your tolerance. Good night.